Have you ever heard of a place that just doesn't let you leave? I'm not talking about a 5-star hotel you never want to check out of. I'm talking about a place that physically traps you, a real-life labyrinth with no exit. For a group of unsuspecting truck drivers, this nightmare became their reality in a remote, dense forest in Siberia, a place that has since been chillingly nicknamed the Forest of Imprisonment. Our story begins in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Yakutia, a region in Russia famous for its extreme temperatures and wild, untamed landscapes. It was here that a convoy of heavy-duty trucks, laden with essential supplies, embarked on what should have been a routine delivery. The drivers were seasoned professionals, familiar with the treacherous roads and the harsh Siberian climate. They were tough, resourceful, and knew the land, or so they thought. Their intended route was a well-known, albeit difficult, winter road, but Siberia is a fickle beast. An unexpected and severe blizzard, a white-walled monster of snow and wind, suddenly descended upon them. Visibility dropped to near zero. The road they knew and trusted vanished beneath a thick, rapidly growing blanket of white. Disoriented and fighting against the elements, the lead driver made a fateful decision. He spotted what looked like an old, alternative logging trail on his map, a potential shortcut that could bypass the worst of the storm. In a desperate bid to save time and escape the blizzard's fury, the convoy turned off the main road and plunged into the dense taiga forest. At first, the decision seemed to pay off. The thick canopy of pine and birch trees offered some protection from the raging winds. The trail was narrow and winding, but it was passable. The drivers pushed onward, their powerful engines echoing through the silent, snow-filled woods. But as they ventured deeper and deeper, a sense of unease began to creep in. The trail, which should have eventually reconnected with a major road, just kept going, twisting and turning in on itself like a serpent. The forest grew denser, the trees crowding in on them, their branches like skeletal fingers scratching at the sides of their trucks. They were no longer on a path, they were in a maze. After hours of driving with no end in sight, they stopped. The realization dawned on them with the cold, terrifying certainty. They were lost. Completely and utterly lost. Their GPS signals were non-existent, swallowed by the immense wilderness. The trail behind them was already being erased by the falling snow. Turning their massive rigs around on the narrow path was impossible. The only way was forward, but forward was just more of the same, an endless, repeating pattern of trees and snow. The forest had swallowed them whole. As they turned into a frigid, unnervingly quiet night, the situation grew dire. They were trapped. Their initial supply of fuel, which they thought was more than enough, was now being consumed just to keep the engines running for warmth. Surviving the Siberian night without heat was not an option. Temperatures plummeted to unimaginable lows, turning the inside of their cabins into ice boxes the moment an engine was shut off. They began rationing their food, sharing what little they had. The camaraderie of the road became a lifeline in a sea of silent, white despair. Days bled into a week. The men established a routine born of necessity. They used their axes to chop wood, not just for warmth, but to try and clear a path forward, inch by painful inch. But the forest fought back. For every tree they felled, another seemed to stand in their way. It felt like a conscious entity, a living, breathing prison that was actively working to keep them there. The psychological toll was immense. The endless vista of white and black, the oppressive silence broken only by the howl of the wind, began to wear on their minds. Hope started to dwindle, replaced by annoying fear. They tried everything. They fired flares into the sky, but the dense canopy smothered the light. They used their radios, but only static answered their desperate calls. They were completely cut off from the outside world, a tiny island of humanity in a vast, indifferent wilderness. The landscape, once a familiar workspace, had become their jailer. The trucks, once symbols of power and freedom, were now their cages. The men were no longer just truck drivers, they were prisoners of the taiga. Just when all hope seemed lost, a miracle happened. A local hunter, checking his traps deep within the forest, stumbled upon the impossible sight, a convoy of massive trucks, half buried in snow, stranded in a part of the forest no vehicle should ever be. He was their salvation. It took him 2 days to trek back to the nearest village and raise the alarm. A massive rescue operation was launched. Bulldozers and heavy-duty recovery vehicles were dispatched, battling the same unforgiving terrain that had trapped the drivers. It was a slow, arduous process. Rescuers had to carve a new road through the dense woods to reach them. When they finally broke through, they found the drivers gaunt and exhausted, but alive. They had survived for over a month in the frozen prison, a testament to their incredible resilience and will to live. They had battled starvation, extreme cold, and the crushing psychological weight of being lost in a place that seemed determined to keep them forever. When they were finally let out, the drivers described the forest not just as a location, but as an antagonist. They spoke of the bewildering paths that led nowhere, the disorienting silence, and the chilling feeling of being watched. Their story became a local legend, a cautionary tale for anyone who dares to underestimate the power of the Siberian wilderness. The Forest of Imprisonment earned its name, a place on the map marked by an experience of pure survival against an impassive, all-powerful force of nature. It's a stark reminder that we are only ever guests on this planet, and sometimes, the environment itself can become the most inescapable prison of all. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the map. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next video. Have you ever driven down a lonely country road and seen an old, forgotten vehicle rusting away in a field? What stories do you think it holds? Well, a few years back, my friends and I stumbled upon something straight out of a mystery novel, and it's a story I've hesitated to share until now. We were exploring an old, overgrown logging trail, the kind that's barely a path anymore. Deep in the woods, half swallowed by vines and rust, sat a vintage pickup truck. It was a beautiful, tragic sight. The paint was peeling, the tires were flat, and nature was slowly reclaiming it. Curiosity, of course, got the better of us. We carefully pried open the driver's side door, which groaned in protest. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Most of the interior was ruined, but in the glove compartment, wrapped in what was left of an oilskin cloth, was a small, leather-bound diary. It felt heavy in my hands, both in weight and in significance. The leather was cracked and worn, and a simple brass latch held it shut. You could just feel the history radiating from it. Who did it belong to? Why was it left here in this truck, abandoned in the middle of nowhere? Back at home, under better light, we carefully opened the latch. The pages were yellowed and brittle, and the ink, written in a surprisingly elegant cursive, was faded in many places. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago. It began simply enough, detailing the life of a traveling salesman named Arthur Penelagon. He wrote about the towns he visited, the people he met, the lonely nights spent in cheap motels. He described the hum of the road and the changing seasons from behind the wheel of his truck, this very truck. At first, it was just a fascinating glimpse into a bygone era. Arthur wrote about selling encyclopedias, a profession that feels almost mythical now. He talked about the optimism of the time, the feeling that anything was possible. He had a wife, Eleanor, and a young daughter, Rose, whom he missed dearly. He'd fill pages with descriptions of the little gifts he was collecting for them on his travels. It was sweet, almost poetic, but as we read further, the tone began to shift. The entries became shorter, more erratic. Arthur started describing a recurring dream, a dream of a winding road that never ended, with a shadowy figure always just visible in the rearview mirror. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the dream feeling more real than his own memories. He tried to brush it off as fatigue from long hours of driving, but the feeling of being watched, of being followed, started to creep into his waking hours. He wrote about strange occurrences, a flat tire on a deserted stretch of highway, only to find no nail or puncture. The radio switching stations on its own, always landing on static. Small objects in his motel rooms being moved when he was certain he was alone. He started questioning his own sanity, filling the pages with frantic, looping questions. Am I losing my mind? He wrote. Or is something out there with me? The cheerful accounts of selling encyclopedias were placed by paranoid observations. He described seeing the same dark sedan in different towns, hundreds of miles apart. He detailed the face of a man he saw in a diner, a man with eyes like polished stones, who just sat and stared at him until Arthur, unnerved, had to leave. The diary transformed from a travelogue into a chronicle of escalating fear. He stopped calling his wife. The entries about her and Rose became filled with a terrible sense of dread. He wrote, "How can I go home? What if I lead it to them?" He was convinced that whatever was haunting him was tied to the road, to the truck itself. He felt trapped, a prisoner in his own life, constantly moving to outrun a shadow he couldn't shake. The most disturbing part was the change in his handwriting. The elegant cursive devolved into a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. Entire pages were filled with strange symbols and drawing spirals, eye-like shapes, and jagged lines that looked like maps of non-existent places. It was the visual representation of a mind coming undone. He wasn't just scared anymore, he was becoming consumed by his terror. The final entries are what truly haunt me. They are fragmented, barely coherent sentences. It knows my name. The engine is cold. Smell of damp earth. It's in the mirror. And then, the very last entry, just 3 words, written with so much pressure that the pen nearly tore through the page. It is in here. After that, the diary is blank. We sat in stunned silence after reading that last page. What happened to Arthur Penelagon? Did he simply abandon his truck and his life, trying to escape the thing that tormented him? Or did something more sinister happen right there, inside the cab where we found the diary? The macabre nature of it all ... it just hangs in the air. The final words, "It's in here," could mean anything. In the truck, in the diary, or worse, inside him. We did some research, of course. We looked up old missing person reports from that era. We found a record for an Arthur Penelagon. He and his truck were reported missing by his wife, Eleanor, after he failed to return from a sales trip. He was never found. The case went cold, just another person swallowed by the vastness of the country. We turned the diary over to the local historical society, hoping they could preserve it and maybe, one day, shed more light on the mystery. We told them the story of where we found it. They were fascinated, of course, but for us, it left a permanent mark. Every time I see an old, abandoned car now, I don't just see a piece of junk. I see a story, a vessel of memories, and possibly a tomb of secrets. The story of Arthur Penelagon is a chilling reminder that some mysteries are never solved, and some questions are best left unanswered. The open road can be a place of freedom, but for some, it can become a dead end. Thanks for listening to my story. It's one that has stuck with me for years, and I felt it was finally time to share it. If you enjoy tales of mystery and things that can't quite be explained, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Stay curious, stay safe, and maybe think twice before opening a glove box in the middle of the woods. See you in the next video. Have you ever been woken up by a strange noise in the middle of the night? A floorboard creaking, a distant siren, or be just the wind rattling your window pane? Usually, we can explain these sounds away. We roll over and fall back asleep, but what if the sound was a voice? A desperate voice, crackling through an old radio, calling for help from a place that shouldn't exist. This is the story of the Oak Ridge Anomaly, a tale that blurs the line between a technical glitch and something far more unsettling. It all started with a group of amateur radio enthusiasts, or ham operators, who loved nothing more than scanning the airwaves in the dead of night. For them, the pre-dawn hours were a magical time. With less atmospheric interference, radio signals could travel incredible distances, bouncing off the ionosphere and bringing whispers from the other side of the world into their small workshops. On a cold autumn morning, around 3 a.m., a young operator named Leo was doing just that. He was slowly turning the dial on his vintage transceiver, listening to the familiar hiss and crackle of static. Suddenly, a faint signal broke through. It wasn't the usual Morse code or a garbled conversation from a trucker. It was a voice. Panicked, it was a repeated, fragmented message. Mayday, Mayday. Is anyone reading? We are lost the sun . The sun is wrong . Leo's heart began to race. A Mayday call is the universal distress signal. He cranked up the gain, trying to clean up the transmission. The voice sounded old-fashioned, laced with static, like it was coming from an old black and white movie. He grabbed a notepad and began to transcribe the message as it looped. Mayday ... We are off course. All systems failing. The sun is wrong ... Oak Ridge ... We are at Oak Ridge ... Mayday ... Oak Ridge. Leo knew the name. It was an abandoned mining town about 50 miles away, nestled deep in the mountains. The mines had been closed for over 70 years after a catastrophic collapse. The town was a ghost town, reclaimed by nature, with no power, no people, and certainly no active radio transmitters. How could a distress call be coming from there? He checked the signal's frequency. It was an old AM band, one that hadn't been used for aviation or maritime communication in decades. The technology was completely obsolete. Over the next few days, Leo shared his recording with his online radio community. The response was electric. Others reported hearing the same signal, always between 3 o'clock and 3:30 in the morning. They dubbed it the Oak Ridge Anomaly. The message was always the same. The sun is wrong. What could that possibly mean? This phrase was the most chilling part. It was nonsensical, yet delivered with such genuine terror. Intrigued and a little spooked, Leo and two of his friends, Chloe, a tech whiz, and Ben, a local history buff, decided to investigate. They packed their gear, portable radio equipment, spectrum analyzers, and powerful flashlights, and planned a trip to Oak Ridge. Ben dug up old town records. The Oak Ridge mine disaster of 1953 was a dark chapter in local history. A section of the mine had collapsed, trapping a dozen miners. Rescue efforts were futile, and the mine was sealed, becoming a permanent tomb for the men inside. There was no mention of any planes or radio distress calls associated with the incident. The trio drove out to the deserted town. As dusk began to fall, the air grew cold and heavy. The remains of Oak Ridge were eerie skeletal wooden buildings groaning in the wind, swallowed by vines and shadow. They set up their base camp near the sealed entrance of the old mine, marked by a rusted, withered plaque. As the clock ticked past midnight, the woods around them fell silent. The atmosphere was tense. They set up their sensitive radio equipment, hoping to pinpoint the source of the transmission. 3 a.m. arrived. As if on cue, the static on their receiver changed. A weak, wavering signal began to pulse. It was him. The same terrified voice, the same crackling transmission. Mayday ... Mayday ... We are at Oak Ridge. The sun is wrong ... Chloe worked furiously on her laptop, triangulating the signal's origin. The result made her blood run cold. She turned to Leo and Ben, her face pale in the glow of the screen. It's not coming from the town, she whispered. The signal. It's coming from underground directly from the location of the sealed mine. A wave of disbelief and fear washed over them. How was this possible? There was no power down there, no radio equipment. The miners from 1953 wouldn't have had portable radios. It made no logical sense. Yet, the evidence was right there, pulsing on their screen. Ben, the historian, suddenly remembered a small detail from his research. One of the miners who perished, a man named Arthur, was a veteran of World War II. Before becoming a miner, he had been a radio operator on a bomber plane. Could it be him, a spirit, forever replaying his final moments, confusing the darkness of the collapsed mine with the night flight gone wrong. What about the sun is wrong? Perhaps, trapped in the eternal darkness, his last memory was of the morning sun he was supposed to see after his shift. A sun he would never see again. The wrongness wasn't in the sky, but in its absence. The distress call wasn't from a pilot lost in the sky, but from a soul lost in the earth, trapped in a moment of terror that had stretched on for 70 years. As the signal faded with the first hint of dawn, the trio packed their equipment in silence. They hadn't solved a technical mystery, they had stumbled upon an echo of a tragedy. A ghostly voice, transmitted not by wires and waves, but by grief and time itself. They left Oak Ridge that morning with more questions than answers, and with a profound sense of sorrow for the voice trapped beneath the mountain. The Oak Ridge anomaly remains unexplained. Is it a unique natural radio phenomenon? A geological feature that somehow records and replays audio? Or is it something else? A testament to the fact that some calls for help never fade away, echoing through time and waiting forever for an answer. Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't the ones with monsters, but the ones that remind us of the very real human tragedies that lie hidden just beneath the surface. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into strange and mysterious events. Let me know in the comments what you think the Oak Ridge signal could be. Until next time, stay curious.